SBO is the best.
Let's lock in. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to explain the double circulatory system. So systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. You'll be able to know the arteries, veins, capillaries, and their different characteristics. Be able to describe blood flow through the heart, so how it moves through the chambers, the valves, the septum, and the key blood vessels in the heart. Be able to define heart rate, stroke volume, and cardiac output. Be able to explain the role of red blood cells, describe the pathway of air going through the lungs and how the diaphragm and intercostals work in breathing, define breathing rate, tidal volume, minute ventilation, explain the role of alveoli, where gaseous exchange occurs, and lastly, define aerobic versus anaerobic and link it to intensity and duration of exercise. Okay, let's jump right in. So what do we mean by double circulation? So humans, we have a double circulatory system. It means that blood passes through the heart not once but twice in one full circuit. So it has pulmonary circulation. This is where the blood goes from the heart to the lungs and then back to the heart. And then we have systemic circulation, which is where blood goes from the heart to the body and then back to the heart. So remember, double circulatory system means blood is passing through the heart twice. Now we're going to look at the types of blood vessels. We've touched up on blood and how it goes through the heart twice, but what's actually carrying that blood? What's actually keeping the blood going to the right places, keeping the blood at the right pressure, and making sure that things in the blood, such as oxygen, are actually directed to where they need to go. So we're going to look at three different types of blood vessels that do this job. And the first one's arteries, then we're going to look at veins, and we're going to look at capillaries. So arteries carry blood away from the heart, and the blood they carry is usually oxygen-rich blood, which we can also call oxygenated blood. The only exception, the only artery that doesn't carry oxygenated blood is a pulmonary artery, which actually carries deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs. So that's the only artery that doesn't carry oxygenated blood. And arteries, to help them in their function, they have thick muscular walls to be able to withstand high blood pressure. Now, veins carry blood back to the heart and they carry oxygen poor blood. So we have oxygen rich blood, but the blood that veins carry isn't rich in oxygen. So we call that deoxygenated blood. And again, the only exception, the only vein that doesn't carry deoxygenated blood is the pulmonary vein, which carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. And veins have lower pressure than arteries, and so they have thin walls because they don't really have high pressure to be withstanding. Lastly, we have capillaries. These are tiny blood vessels that connect arteries to veins. Capillaries are really important because they have thin walls for gaseous exchange and for diffusion. So gaseous exchange of oxygen and CO2, and also diffusion of nutrients, so that the nutrients can move into the tissues and waste products can move out of the body tissues. So you can see here again a visual representation of what the vessels might look like. So arteries, you see they have that thick muscular wall. Veins, they have thinner walls, and they also have little structures in them called valves. And these valves basically help to make sure that blood doesn't flow back. So if blood is flowing one way, you don't want it to flow back. So the valves help to prevent it from flowing backwards. And the capillaries are really small, one cell thick, and they have really thin walls to allow substances to diffuse in and out. Okay, so right now your heart is going to doom, to doom, to doom. Your heart is constantly beating. We're going to zoom into what happens when your heart beats each time, and we're going to look at the different structures in the heart and how they all work together. So, we have the four chambers of the heart. We have the atria, which are the top two chambers, and the ventricles, which are the bottom two chambers. So, this is the right atrium here, this chamber right here. So that's the right atrium, and on the left side of the heart, the left upper chamber. This chamber here is the left atrium, and then the bottom right chamber here, this chamber right here, is the right ventricle, and then the bottom left chamber, you can see this chamber right here, is the left ventricle. And this wall in the middle, right here, is what we call the septum. So what's that wall in the middle? The septum. And as you can see, the septum is basically there to separate the left and the right side of the heart so that the oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood don't mix together. Now we have valves. Remember I spoke about valves in veins that stop the backflow of blood? Well, we also have valves in the heart that do the same purpose. They stop the backflow of blood going back from one chamber to the other. So these valves are usually found in between the atria and the ventricles, and they can also be found at the exit of the blood vessels, as you can see here and here. And these are the ones in between the atria and the ventricles, you can see here and here. Okay, this valve on the right side that separates the right atrium from the right ventricle, this valve right here that I'm shading out, we call this the tricuspid valve. So this valve right here is called the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve, and it separates the right atrium from the right ventricle. Now on the other side, we have another valve that does a similar function, separating the left atrium from the left ventricle. You can see this valve here. Valves are like doorways, so you see they're like doorways that open up and stop blood from going back the other way. And this valve here that stops the backflow of blood is found in between the left atrium and the left ventricle. Is called the bicuspid valve, sometimes also known as the mitral valve. And lastly, you need to know about the semilunar valves. So semilunar valves are the valves that lead out of the ventricles. So you see these ventricles, blood comes in through the atrium and it goes out through the ventricles here. Same thing on the left side, blood comes in through the atrium and it leaves through the ventricle up here. You can see this is the ventricle going out. So the valves are found at the exits of the ventricles. So you can see this is one of them right here. This is another one right here. And these valves are called semilunar valves. Semilunar valves. Semilunar valves. They lead out of the ventricles into the big arteries that carry blood out of the heart. Now let's talk about the blood pathway to the heart. So what actually happens? Okay, so what happens is you get blood coming in from the body into the right atrium, and that blood comes in through blood vessels called the superior and inferior vena cava. So this is the vena cava. This blood vessel, this big blood vessel here, and also this blood vessel down here. But we can differentiate them because one is the superior vena cava, and if you could guess, superior would be the one on top. So this vena cava up here, we call that the superior vena cava, and the one down here is the inferior vena cava, but you can just refer to it as vena cava because they are both vena cava. So blood comes in from the body via the vena cava, then it enters the right atrium, here, and then it moves from the right atrium, going past the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle here, and then from the right ventricle it moves out via the pulmonary artery, going past the semilunar valve, and then the pulmonary artery takes the blood out to the lungs to pick up oxygen, and then it picks up oxygen from the lungs, then it comes back in via the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. Then from the left atrium it goes down into the left ventricle, going past the bicuspid or mitral valve, and then from the left ventricle it leaves the heart, going past the semilunar valve, and it exits the heart through this massive artery called the aorta, which is the biggest artery. And then from the aorta it goes out into the body, and then boom, that's one heartbeat. The blood comes back again from the body and the whole cycle continues. When you're retelling this pathway of blood, always remember that the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood back to the heart. So don't get it mixed up, because those are the only exceptions when it comes to arteries and veins. So don't get tripped up by that. So again, quick recap of what we've just spoken about. Vena cava to the right atrium, past the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle, into the pulmonary artery, to the lungs, pulmonary vein back to the left atrium, via the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle, and then out through the aorta. Now let's talk about key definitions you need to know. You need to understand what is meant by heart rate, stroke volume, and cardiac output, and also this formula for cardiac output. Alright, we've spoken about blood, but we haven't spoken about something really important in blood, and these are red blood cells. So we're going to talk about the role of red blood cells. Red blood cells are basically oxygen delivery trucks, right? That's their main role, is to transport oxygen, and they contain a protein in them called hemoglobin to help them do that. Hemoglobin binds to oxygen and carries the oxygen to the muscles, and hemoglobin can also help bring back carbon dioxide from the body and take it to the lungs to be breathed out, because carbon dioxide is a waste gas. Alright, we've spoken about the heart and the cardiovascular system. Let's talk about the respiratory system now. Let's talk about breathing, let's talk about air. So this is what the respiratory system looks like, and these are the structures you need to know of how air moves into your body. So obviously it starts from the nose, or if you breathe via your mouth as well, it starts from the nose, mouth, then it goes down via the trachea, then it splits into the bronchi. This is one bronchus, this is the second bronchus, and both of them are your bronchi. And then it goes into the bronchioles, which are these smaller airways. Those are your bronchioles, the smaller airways. And then finally it gets to the alveoli. Alveoli are little structures at the end of the bronchioles where gaseous exchange occurs. You also have this massive muscle down here called the diaphragm, and that's very important. We're going to look at its role in breathing shortly. So these are the structures you need to know for your respiratory system. And this is how those structures help you breathe. So the really interesting thing about the lungs is your lungs don't just magically pull air in. Like, they don't just have a switch that pulls air in automatically. You have to change the volume in your chest and pressure in your chest, and that ultimately is what causes air to be pulled in. So during inhalation, which is breathing in, this is what happens. The diaphragm, which, remember, this dome shaped muscle we looked at here, the diaphragm is going to contract and flatten. So the diaphragm contracts and flattens. The external intercostal muscles contract. So external intercostal muscles are muscles that are found in between your ribs, and they basically just help to move the ribs. So in this case, during inhalation, your external intercostal muscles contract, and that causes the ribs to lift up and out. So external intercostal muscles contracts, lifting the ribs up and out. Ultimately, this causes your chest volume to increase, so the pressure in your chest drops, and this causes air to move in. So that's what happens during inhalation, during breathing in. Now, during exhalation, what happens? Your diaphragm relaxes this time. So it relaxes, it's not flat anymore, and it returns back to its natural curved dome shape. What happens next? Your intercostals relax, so this causes chest volume to decrease, therefore the pressure in your chest cavity increases and air moves out. Okay, here are some key definitions you need to know when we talk about the respiratory system. So we have breathing rate, tidal volume, minute ventilation, and the formula for minute ventilation as well. Alright, before we touch on the last thing in this video, let's zoom in on the alveoli. So remember, we spoke about these tiny air sacs called alveoli where gaseous exchange happens. So let's zoom into what really happens down here in more detail. So the alveoli is where oxygen diffuses from the alveoli into the blood, and in the opposite direction, carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli to be breathed out or to be exhaled. And the alveoli has really interesting characteristics that allow these things to happen. So the alveoli has thin walls to allow for effective diffusion. It also has a big surface area which creates a lot of space for a greater capacity of diffusion and gaseous exchange. And lastly, alveoli are surrounded by loads of capillaries, which gives it a good blood supply and allows for effective diffusion. Okay, so that's what you need to know about the function of alveoli, these little air sacs. Now, let's move on to aerobic and anaerobic exercise. Aerobic exercise, or whenever you hear aerobic, that means that energy is being produced using oxygen. And any exercise that is aerobic is usually longer duration and low to moderate intensity. Examples of aerobic exercise are anything long distance running, marathons, cycling, continuous swimming, so on and so forth. Anything that is long duration and low to moderate intensity. Now, on the other hand, anaerobic exercise means that energy is being produced without oxygen. And anaerobic exercise is usually short duration but very high intensity. Examples are 100-meter sprint, any plyometric exercise, heavy weight lifting, anything that is explosive, like jumping, throwing, punching, and activities of that nature. All right, that's it for this video. Before I leave you, I want to give you one tip to really ace this topic. Okay, these are the common mistakes that students usually make, and I'm giving you these tips so that you don't make the same mistakes. So mistake number one: don't mix up pulmonary artery with pulmonary vein, because they are different and you need to know what they do. Mistake number two is forgetting valves are one way and they stop blood from flowing the other way, and mixing up the names of tricuspid and bicuspid valves. Don't do that. Mistake number three is not learning your formulas. And mistake number four is not mastering gaseous exchange. So master what happens in the alveoli and the capillaries, learn it properly. I would encourage you to check out our website, Super PE Online, for more resources that will help you really lock this topic in and ace your exams. All right, see you in the next video.